5:25? Hey, hello everybody. Long day, huh? This is the end of day 2, isn't it? Yeah. And I'm the only thing standing in the way of a nice ice cold beer. I understand free drinks are at 6:30, so I'm going to finish on time because I want one too. This is about deploying Windows Server, and the server choice I'm going to make is 2008 R2. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Rhonda. I'm from the States, and I got really, really lucky by getting the chance to come here to New Zealand. It's my first trip to either New Zealand or Australia, and I've had a phenomenal time. This has been so much fun, trip of a lifetime. I've been in IT for almost 30 years now. I started back in '82 when I joined the Navy in the States, spent 7 years there, and really enjoyed it. Loved the military, but I ended up having a couple kids thinking, oh, it's time to get out and take care of the kids instead of running all over the world. So did that for a while. I write for Windows IT Pro magazine. I do a lot of deployment articles for them. And the articles that I do, if you're not familiar with my articles, I like to do bottom line, step by step. If you want to deploy a Server 2008 R2 operating system using MDT 2010, here are the step-by-steps. I just did, I believe it was this month, they gave me 6 pages for my article, and it was migrating XP to Windows 7 using MDT 2010. So if you have access to IT Pro magazine and you want some cheat sheets for how to get started really quick, they're there for you. I'm a setup and deployment MVP, so once a year I get to go out to Redmond and sit down with the guys that write the products that I use, and we get to talk about how great they are and how much work some of them still need to have. So that's lots of fun. I'm also a desktop deployment product specialist. My goal for this session is to show you guys how to deploy server operating systems using MDT 2010 Update 1. The tools I'm going to show you are either free like MDT, or the second half of the talk is going to be on Windows Deployment Service, the new RIS, if you're not familiar with it. And that's in the box with your server operating systems. I want to show you the quickest way to get started and get an operating system deployed. But first, I want to make sure everybody's on the same page for the different types of image formats that we have now, because there's a new kid on the block. We've got WIM files that have been out there for quite a while. Is everybody familiar with Windows image files? You can create them using ImageX, one of the tools in the Wake. MDT can create WIM files for you. One of the downfalls of a WIM image is it can only contain one partition. But one of the nice things about the WIM file format is you can put multiple images inside a single WIM file. So you could get an image of partition C, put that in a WIM file. Then take an image of partition D, put that in the same WIM file. So you can keep everything together. Another nice thing you can do with WIM images is you can put the same operating system. Let's say you create a 2008 R2 server and you throw applications on it for your HP utilities. You create a WIM file. Now you've got a WIM image out there. You create another 2008 R2 server, and this time you put your Dell utilities in it. You could store that second image file in the first WIM, and something really cool happens. It's called single instancing. It wakes up and it looks at every single file you're going to put inside that WIM. If it already exists, think about the core operating system files. It just puts a pointer to it. It won't store that same file over and over and over again. So that's kind of cool. Second type of images we have, VHD images. How many of you have played with VHD images yet? Pretty good number. I say about 10%, 15% of you. Nice thing about a VHD image is you can take an image of the entire hard drive with multiple partitions in it, and you just have one image. Some of these tools support both WIM and VHD, and some don't. That's why I wanted to explain what the different types of image files are before we get started. The second issue we run into all the time when it comes to deployment tools, should I use a thick image, a thin image? And now we have something called a hybrid image. So, first of all, a thick image has everything in it. All your applications, everything is in a thick image. You deploy that out to your client machines. Can be desktop, can be a server OS. Takes a little bit longer to deploy, and they're harder to manage when it comes time to make changes to them. So I'm not a big fan of thick images. Thin images usually do the job for you. A thin image would just deploy the operating system, and then you use some other tool to get your applications and drivers and things like that out there. Applications, you might use group policies, you might use MDT, or just some of the wait tools themselves manually. That's where we come up with the hybrid image. I'll bet most of you have specific applications that need to be in every server image that you put out there. So you could go ahead and deploy a server operating system that maintains just the corporate software that has to be on there. Maybe it's some corporate approved hardware utilities. But then you also want to include, on the HP models, you want to put the HP utilities on them. On the Dell models, you want to put the Dell utilities. So you can create a hybrid that just has the operating system, your corporate approved hardware utilities, and that's what you deploy out, and then use MDT to go ahead and put the other applications on top of it. So I'm a big fan of the hybrid. First tool we're going to start with, MDT 2010. I understand Mike did a really good talk this afternoon. How many of you sat that talk? Good, 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 lots of you. Talking about how to create the master image. And this is like a 50,000-foot view of the talk that he did detailed on today. So I've got a 2008 R2 DVD. I install it on a reference machine, sysprep that machine, store my image on my MDT deployment server. When I update the deployment server, I get something called a Windows pre-installation environment, a WinPE. And MDT's WinPEs are really smart. Inside, they actually know who the MDT deployment server is and where the deployment share is that it's supposed to connect to. So these are special WinPEs. You take that custom MDT WinPE, boot your clients with it. They automatically connect to the MDT deployment server and the deployment share and can download an image. You can automate the complete process, which I'm going to show you a little bit at the end of the MDT section. Or you can leave it manual and just answer the questions over and over and over again. Or there's also with MDT, and these are not well-known features, you could put your entire deployment, if it will fit, on a single DVD. There's a special feature called Media. So you can go into the MDT's deployment workbench, create your media, burn it to a DVD, send that DVD out to your branch office that doesn't have a server. They could put the DVD in, turn on the machine, and walk away. You could automate it to that point. You can also put this on an external hard drive or a UFD if your machines boot using flash USB devices. Some of the pros and cons. The pro is that that client doesn't need any network connectivity to your deployment share in order to get the image. The big negative here, there's no version control either. So whatever your branch office has is what they're going to deploy. What if they're deploying something you sent them 6 months ago? There's really no way you're going to be able to stop them. They lost the newest DVD or external hard drive you sent them, got lost in the mail. So they're still deploying the old image that hasn't been patched properly. So there's some pros and some cons to it. Let's take a peek at what a MDT network deployment looks like. All right, this is my MDT server. Now I'm curious, how many of you guys have seen, oh, I didn't start my timer, uh-oh. You're going to have to tell me when it's close to time. How many of you guys have used the old MDT 2010? So about 50% of the crowd. How many of you have gone up to 2010 Update 1? About 8 people. Okay. One of the big differences is the background. This is what your background is going to look like now. So what I've done here on this virtual machine is I've booted one of the custom MDT WinPEs. That's what you're looking at. This is the default of what it's going to boot into. This is your welcome Windows deployment wizard. A couple things I can do on this screen. I can tell it to go ahead and run the deployment wizard. If I have a machine that's having trouble booting and I want it to go through the recovery process, Looking for the system and boot files, I could choose Run Windows Recovery. I could exit to a command prompt. Why would you want to boot this and then exit to a command prompt? What if you have a failed deployment and you need to get in there and take a look at the log files? You don't want to start the deployment again. You want to go look at the log files and find out what happened. So you can exit to a command prompt, go into C:\\mini-nt, drill down the folders until you get to the logs. All your logs will be right there. Up to this point, I've been depending on DHCP to hand me an IP address for my clients. If you don't have access to a DHCP server, you can click Configure Static IP Network Settings and input your own IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, DNS, and WINS IP addresses. I'm going to tell it to go ahead and run the deployment wizard. And the first thing I have to do is give it some credentials to connect to those network shares. I'm not going to let these finish because I'm going to do so many demos, and if I tried to let them finish, we'd be here till 10 o'clock tonight. I'm going to go ahead and choose my task sequence I've created. It's my Server 2008 R2. In fact, you know what? I'm going to choose the second one I created, the server with no roles or features. I'm going to show you the roles and features you can add to this. It's pretty slick. Give it a computer name. I'm just going to be real fancy and call this Server 1. I'm going to leave it in a work group. Language, other preferences. I'm going to go ahead and accept the defaults here. Time zone, we'll go up a couple. Find Auckland and Wellington. I'm not going to choose to install XML Notepad. That's the only application I've added to the deployment workbench. Do I want to capture an image of this computer? I'm going to choose not to at this point. I'm also not going to enable BitLocker. You could if you wanted, and you can tell it where to store that recovery key. And we'll tell it to go ahead and begin. And this is the nice little progress bar you're going to see. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but I want to mention it one more time. If you get error messages while this is running, the error messages are going to be thrown right up underneath this box. So if it looks like you've been sitting at the same thing, formatting and partitioning a disk for an hour and a half, you might want to go ahead and move this box out of the way and see if there's an error underneath it. All right, that's your MDT deployment wizard. Some steps I had to do to get it there. First thing I had to do is create a deployment share. The old Solution Accelerator Business Desktop Deployment Kit, I could have sworn back then somebody was getting paid by the syllable when it came to naming some of these utilities. It's like you get out of breath just repeating what the name was. The good old BDD. It would create the deployment share for you, but it would put it on the C drive. You really don't want your deployment share on the same drive as your operating system or your boot files. It's going to be busy enough as it is. So the new MDT, the older version, and this one as well, allows you to choose where to put it. The deployment share is actually the shared folder your client machines are going to connect to across the network in order to perform the deployment. Then you're going to add an operating system. You've got a couple different choices for operating systems. You can tell it a full set of source files and then point to the next page. If you click next on this, the next page would be where is your 2008 Server R2 DVD or equivalent ISO file, and you would import the entire thing. You can also choose to create your own custom WIM images. In fact, you could use ImageX from the Wait tools and create your own images. The last option is Windows Deployment Service. You could tell MDT to go look at what operating system images you have on your WDS server and import all of those into MDT. You can't pick and choose which ones you want. It's either give me all of them or none of them. These are operating systems that are supported. You'll notice that XP, SP3 is still supported to deploy out there. Will be for a while longer. So MDT doesn't just do servers or desktop OSs. It'll do both for you. Then you're going to add your other components, applications like hardware utilities, or one of my favorite utilities. Who has to open XML files all the time and go in and edit them? Everybody has to do this now, don't they? It's like everything's turning XML. XML Notepad is a fantastic free download from Microsoft. It's a little tiny program, and it allows you, after you've installed it, to right-click on an XML and open it in this beautiful graphical user interface. You can edit documents, you can do whatever you want in there, but it's much, much easier to read. So I love that utility. I put it on everything. You can add third-party drivers, and you can add packages. Those would be your operating system patches and language packs. Next step is to create a task sequence. And this is where I get to show you a really, really cool feature where you can add roles. So I can say not only deploy Server 2008 R2, but make that machine a domain controller. Make that machine DHCP. Make it a Hyper-V server. I'll show you how you can add those roles very quickly and easily. I'm going to scoot back over here and stop this so I can have a little bit more power. And we're back on our 2010 server. Once you've installed MDT, the snapping you're going to use is called the deployment workbench, and this is the deployment workbench. To create a task sequence, I'm going to expand my deployment share, and then I'm going to go down and right-click Deployment Share and choose New Task Sequence. All right. First thing we'll do is give it a task sequence ID. Let's give this an ID of Serve 2K8, X64. Because there isn't any 32-bit flavor, right? Server 2008 R2 only comes in 64-bit versions. And this we'll just say is going to be Server 2008. X64. It's giving me those little exclamations because I already have task sequences with either that ID or that name. And so it pops up the exclamation at the end. And that's when I know, oh, wait, I've got to make it unique. So I just try to keep adding things to it. The task sequence comments, guys, take 2 minutes. Input what's supposed to happen after you run this task sequence, just for your own sanity. After you get 20, 30 task sequences built, you'll forget what one was supposed to do versus another, and being able to look at these comments is going to be very helpful to you. Of course, I'm not going to do it right now. We'll click Next, and the template I'm going to use is the standard server task sequence. We'll click Next. We'll deploy Server 2008, Enterprise. Next, and I'm not going to specify a product key at this time. Click Next, Organization. We'll just say Deployment. You could also input an IE home page for each one of the machines that will receive this deployment. The admin password. Enter that twice and click Next. Next, and finish. We now have a brand new task sequence. The nice thing about the task sequence, it takes almost 60 seconds to create, so they're really easy to create. And the whole point is if you have multiple operating systems, you guys saw I've got Windows 7 OSs in the deployment workbench as well. The task sequence is what allows me to grab that one operating system, whatever drivers I want, whatever patches I want, roll it all into one bundle, and then deploy that out. So most of what you're going to be doing when you start working with the deployment workbench is you're going to be creating task sequences. You won't spend a lot of time importing operating system images because the best thing you can do is just import the one off the DVD. So you get the Server 2008 R2 DVD, go to the Sources folder, and import install.wim. Start from there, you're halfway done. But this is the cool stuff. If we go into our task sequences, we can actually see all the tasks that are supposed to be performed in order to successfully deploy this operating system and the order in which they're supposed to be performed. And I'm not going to go through each one of these. I think Mike would be better at going through each individual. Check the BIOS, pre-install, installation would install a new operating system, post-install tasks that you might want to have done, scripts you want to run, commands you want run. And then there's something really neat that you can do called add roles. I can do DHCP, DNS, make this an Active Directory domain controller. And this is so slick. Can you guys see that all right? All right. It looks pretty small on my screen here. So this new domain controller, do I want it to be a replica DC? Do I want it to be a new RODC, read-only domain controller? New domain in an existing forest, new domain tree in an existing forest. I'm just going to tell it a new domain controller replica. And it automatically knows which other fields I need to fill in. So the existing DNS domain name is deploy.com. The replica source domain controller, that's 2010 server. The account, the user account that is going to allow me permissions to do that, I will give it the administrator account, my password, confirm it. Then you can go into the advanced settings and actually tell it, you know, if DNS isn't installed on that machine, go ahead and install DNS. Let Active Directory install DNS. Wait for critical replication only. The only default it's set is to make it a global catalog server. You can change that if you like. The forest functional level and domain functional level that you want this to come in at, I wouldn't try to bring a domain controller in at a domain or forest functional level that is lower than what you're actually running. So go check in domains and trusts. Go in there and check and see what your domain and forest functional levels are and match that up here. You can tell it where you want to put your folders, your database, the NTDS database, log files, and sysvol, and what site name do you want it to have. So you can go into Active Directory sites and services, confirm the site name, and make sure you're putting it in the right site name. Let me do one other. I want to show you all the list of roles. You guys have all been in Server Manager now, right? I think everybody's seen Server Manager. It's one of the first pages that boots up on your server OSs. This list is going to look very familiar to you. All of these roles and services that can be installed after you've deployed the operating system. And some of these, it's just a check mark in the box. It's that easy to say, just turn that service on. It's just bits you're turning on, registry settings that'll be changed. So it's pretty straightforward. After I've created task sequences, if this is, I've just created a brand new deployment share, one thing I do have to do is update the deployment share. The first time you update your deployment share, it doesn't matter which option you select. If you notice, the first one is optimize the boot image updating process. The second option is completely regenerate the boot images. Like I said, the first time you do it, choose the default, you're good to go. I'm going to cancel because this can take a few minutes. What happens after that is in your deployment share in Windows Explorer, in the boot folder, this is how your MDT WinPEs get generated, is by updating your deployment share. And if there's ever a point where your MDT WinPE is not booting properly, and you say, I just want to toss this one out and create a whole brand new one, that's when you would select the second option to completely regenerate your boot images. And you'll get brand new WinPEs built. And like I said, it can take a few minutes depending on the size of your server, the amount of RAM, how fast your hard drives are. It can be from 15 to 40 minutes. What you're looking at here is we have Light Touch PE. Remember, these are WinPEs. They're just named differently. This is our Light Touch PE 64-bit Win. This is our 32-bit version. Then it takes the WIM files and it runs OSCD-IMG, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow for a command line in the Windows Automated Installation Kit tool. And it converts those into ISO files that you could then burn to a CD. You can also take the WIM files and format them properly, put them on UFD devices or external hard drives. Boot them up. Remember, these guys are so smart, they know who the MDT server is and the name of the shared folder they're supposed to connect to. So don't go try to create your own. It already does it for you. All right, from the client, what you saw me do was boot that MDT WinPE. That's where we started on that client demo, the very first demo I did. We talked about what you can put those on, but what will you see once you boot an MDT WinPE? If you boot the 32-bit version of the WinPE, you're going to get all of your 32-bit operating choices to deploy. If you boot the 64-bit WinPE, you'll get your 64-bit operating systems. The reason I tell you this is because when I first started playing with it myself, I was constantly booting the wrong WinPE and wondering why I couldn't see my task sequences. Because you'll only see the task sequences for the architecture of the WinPE that you've booted. If you'd like to automate that deployment wizard, it's pretty straightforward. You can choose which of the screens to automate, and you can leave some if you like. I like to leave the first screen that came up and have to input credentials. I like to make sure somebody has to authenticate in order to get to my MDT images. And then after that, you can choose to automate the entire thing. We take a look back at my 2010 server. I'm going to open another deployment share I have. We'll browse to it. He's out on the F drive. And it's AutoDS, which brings us to a good point. You can have as many deployment shares on one deployment server as you choose. There's no limit to it. A reason you'd like to have different deployment shares? That's what I'm showing you right here. Is if we go into the properties of the first deployment share that is not automated, and I take you over to the Rules tab, this is what dictates which pages of that deployment wizard you're going to see during the deployment process. This is the default settings, and you saw the pages that showed us. If I show you the properties of another deployment share, which I have automated, it's going to look a little bit different. So just to point out a couple things here, I can tell it to skip the admin password, and then tell it the admin password is swordfish1. But you guys can see that too, right? It's in clear text. So a lot of times I like to say, skip admin password. No. Let me see the admin password and I'll type that one in. Things like product key. You can tell it to skip the product key equals yes, and then tell it what the product key is on the very next line. Tell it to skip task sequences. Yes, here's the task sequence ID. So you can pick and choose which one of those windows you would like to actually see during the deployment and which ones you just want to fly right by. It's up to you how flexible you want to make it. Is there a way you can automate the naming of the machines? Absolutely. I think you can leave an asterisk in there by default, and it comes up with these mini NT dash, makes up just crazy numbers after that. The best place that I found to look for different variables you can put in that is the documentation actually has a whole list of variables that you can use. So you could do it after like serial number of the machine. There's a lot, and you can actually combine the variables to get the exact naming conventions you want. Any other questions on MDT? Everybody's good to go? All right. We'll switch gears here. Let's get into WDS. Has anybody installed WDS and you're using it now? So it's pretty good numbers, probably about 15, maybe 20 of you. In a perfect world, which is not where we all live, right? In a perfect world, a VM world, what we have is a bare metal machine, and then I have a server that has DHCP and WDS installed on it. What should happen, you guys, have you heard of the DORA process when it comes to DHCP? A couple of you are nodding yes. Awesome. Not many people have heard this when I ask it. The DORA process is when a DHCP client boots up, he discovers, oh, look at this, I'm a DHCP client. I need to broadcast out and get an IP address from a DHCP server. That's called a discover packet. That's the D in DORA. So that's step one. This client boots up and he goes, hey, I need an IP address. So my discover packet goes out. DHCP is listening on UDP port 67. He says, okay, I can make you an offer. He goes into his scope, gets the next available IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, any options you have configured, and hands it back to him as an offer. Says, hey, how does this sound? Bare Metal Machine says, oh, I'd like to request that you go ahead and assign that IP information to my MAC address. Server acknowledges, D-O-R-A, he acknowledges that for the next 8 days, if you're sticking with the defaults, that IP address will be assigned to your MAC. Then you get a list of boot images or WinPE images to choose from on the WDS server. Two things I want to mention here. If there's only one boot image on the WDS server, it just boots that one. You don't get the menu. Makes sense. The other thing I like to mention, because I beat my head against the wall on this one for a lot longer than I should have. I was creating my own custom WinPEs. And then I would take that WIM file and I would import it into WDS. I was so excited. Pixie boot my client, goes over, it boots that WinPE, and it's done. I'm like, wait, aren't I supposed to get like the operating system images or something to choose from? Not when you create your own custom WinPE. And if you compare the custom WinPE that you would be creating to one that's on the DVD, and when I mean DVD, it's either Windows 7 or Server 2008 R2 DVD, go into the sources folder, you'll find a file called boot.wim. That's the one you want. Take that guy and import him into your boot images on the WDS server. And then you'll get this next screen. When you boot him, you'll get your list of operating system images that you've added to the WDS server. I promise at least 10 of you are going to walk out who haven't done this, and you'll do the same thing, and it's going to dawn on you, wait a second, she said, and it might take you a while, I've got plenty of cards. If you run into this scenario and you email me, don't feel bad. I did it myself quite a few times. All right. Let's go take a look at what a WDS deployment looks like. I'm going to start this, and I'm going to go back to the slide deck. We're getting our Pixie boot. Shouldn't take this long. Pardon? No. No, that wasn't the DHCP server. But let's do this. Let's make sure he's on VMnet 2. This is my DHCP server. Does everybody look happy in here? Oh, nice. There we go. Not sure what's going on with that guy. I might have him on a different subnet. I was using the last one, and it didn't connect, so I thought, oh, I'm going to try the other one and see if that one connects. So what we have here is I've got two boot images that I've added. One is the boot.wim off the DVD. The second one is one of those MDT Light Touch PE WinPEs. I'm going to show you that at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and boot this guy up. It's going to take a few minutes to boot up, so I'm going to go back to the slide deck, talk a bit about that, and then I'll come back and do this demo in a minute. It's a little bit more configuration to WDS than there is with MDT. You guys noticed I didn't tell you had to have Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, WINS. You didn't have to have all that stuff for MDT, right? There's not a lot of network infrastructure that has to be in place. With WDS, domain-based WDS, you can also have something called a transport WDS server, which is a lot more to configure. That's for people who don't have Active Directory. If you want step-by-steps on that, go to Johan Arvidmark's website and just Google TrueSec, and he'll give you the step-by-steps on how to set up a transport WDS server. I'm doing domain-based. WDS here replaces RIS. Everybody's familiar with that. Provides both boot and operating system images, and it supports both WIM and VHD files. MDT only supports deploying WIM files right now. I'm not sure if VHDs are going to be something that happens soon, but VHD files in WDS isn't pretty. I'm going to show you what you have to do to add one of those. Your WDS requirements. You have to have a DHCP server for your client to get an IP address. Gets an IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, finds out who his DNS servers are. He goes over and talks to his DNS server and says, hey, give me a list of domain controllers. So he gets all the service locator records, the SRV records, for your DCs. He needs to know who he's going to be authenticating against in just a minute. When he connects to the WDS server, he has to use Active Directory to authenticate. Then he gets his boot images and operating system images. So those are your required network infrastructure pieces that you need for a domain-based WDS. Now, is anybody installing WDS on a 2003 SP1 server? Anybody? A couple people went. If you are, it's not a big deal. What you'll have to do first is install RIS, and then get a hold of this patch from Wake 11, Windows Deployment Services Update. Install that patch. It turns it into a WDS server. But you can still hand out your RI prep images that you created using the old RIS tool, because you've installed WDS in legacy mode. If you've got it in legacy mode, you've got some of those old images, you can right-click an image, convert it to a WIM file. Maybe you've got a bunch of them. So if you want, you can take that machine to mixed mode whenever you're ready and for as long as you like. In mixed mode on WDS, you can hand out both the old RIS, RI prep images, and the new WIM and VHD images. Once you take that machine to native mode in WDS, your RI prep images are dead, so you have to convert all of them before you go to native mode. 2003 SP2 is a piece of cake. You're going to go through Control Panel, Add Remove Programs, Windows Components, and you're not going to see RIS anymore. You'll see WDS. 2008 and R2 is even easier. It's just a role you add. The first time you open your WDS snap-in, you should expand the servers node. If you expand the servers node and there's nothing listed beneath it, then you'll need to right-click your servers node, choose Add Server. It'll default to the local server, so just click OK. This is also a way for you to choose to add multiple WDS servers to one snap-in so you can remotely administer them. Once you have your server listed, as I do here, this is my server name in this scenario, I'm going to right-click that and choose Configure Server. The first screen we'll see is right here before you begin, and it tells you you're going to need Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, and an NTFS partition to store your images on. Tell it where you'd like to store your images. Once again, I wouldn't put them on the operating system or boot drives. And if your WDS is being installed on a DHCP server, you'll see this page. If it's not, you won't see this, because we have a little problem here. WDS and DHCP both listen on UDP port 67, and they both work with broadcast traffic by default. They don't share this port. So what we have to do is tell WDS, don't listen on port 67. So if it's not listening on port 67, he couldn't possibly respond to a client and say, I'm the WDS server. So you have to create a DHCP option option number 60 that sets the DHCP option to, and this is really strange, in the actual data packets, it says Pixie client. I would think it's coming from the DHCP server telling you who the Pixie server is, but the actual text in the data packet is Pixie client. So he's telling you, DHCP is saying, here's your IP address. Oh, and by the way, I'm also the WDS server. But that's going to lead us to 3 different scenarios. WDS and DHCP on the same subnet, different servers. Both of them on different subnets. And then both of them on the same server. Different configuration parameters. Let's take the first one. On the same subnet, but they're on different servers. So both are listening on UDP port 67. Your client boots up and sends out a Discover packet to UDP port 67. They both get it. Open it up and look at it. Well, WDS doesn't actually have a scope of IP addresses, so he can't offer you an IP address. The DHCP server offers an IP address, and WDS sends over that Pixie client packet saying, hey, I'm the WDS server. Bare Metal requests the IP address be assigned to his MAC. DHCP acknowledges that request. And then you get your boot images and your operating system images. WDS and DHCP on different subnets. Uh-oh. Now we have routers and switches, and we don't want our broadcast traffic to be shooting all over the place. So we're going to stop broadcast traffic from traversing our switches and routers. So we do the Discover packet from DHCP. He makes him an offer. He says, okay, here's your IP address, subnet mask, and all that other stuff, but I've got 2 options for you now. I've got option number 66 and option 67. Option 66 says, here's the name of the WDS server. Option 67 says when you get to that server, here's the path and the name of the boot file you're supposed to boot. Client request, IP address be assigned to him, DHCP acknowledges. He now knows who the WDS server is, goes down, gets the boot image selection list from him, boots a WinPE, and then gets your operating system image. On the same server, this is kind of strange. Who else loves Network Monitor? It's my favorite all-time tool. Any other? A few of you. Awesome. I thought, I'm going to be really smart about the deployment tools, so I did a network trace. And when I got about 75,000 packets, I realized I'm not going to go through every one of these. And, sorry to say, but Microsoft does not, it hasn't released the WDS parser, so you can't actually read any of the WDS traffic or the multicasting traffic I'm going to talk about here in a second. It just comes up as unknown. Both on the same machine, Bare Metal, Discover packet, gets an offer and says option 60, we talked about option 60 just a second ago, I'm also the WDS server. Bare Metal sends back a request, DHCP sends the acknowledgement, and then it does another Discover and offer. So instead of doing the DORA process, it does a DORA do, which looks really weird in network trace. You're like, why is it doing an additional Discover and offer packet there? Because the client doesn't read the first option 60 that it gets. It reads the second one. I don't know why. But if you actually look at the trace, you'll see you get the DORA process, and then when that's completed, it does another Discover and offer. And that's when he knows who the WDS server is. Then you get your boot menu and your operating system menu. Now, who's that WDS server supposed to talk to? I love this. It's one of my favorite features. This is the last screen to configuring your WDS server. You can tell it, I haven't added any images yet, so don't respond to anyone. That's your default setting. You could tell it respond only to known client computers. What's a known client computer? Who's ever heard of pre-staging in RIS? Quite a few of you. That's what they're talking about. And the ones who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you that in just a second. So it's the same thing as pre-staging in RIS. My favorite feature, respond to all client computers known and unknown, but there's a special setting that I can also turn on that says, but require administrator approval for unknown computers. I'm going to try to do a demo of that so you'll see what happens. Back on my 2010 server. Got DHCP up. We'll close that down. First thing I want to show you is what a known client computer is. Notice where I am. I'm in Active Directory users and computers. I'm going to choose to create a new computer object. I'm going to name it newbie1. Tell it this is a managed computer. That's what makes it known. Go ahead and input the computer's GUID. If it doesn't have a GUID, you can put the MAC address in here without any dashes. Well, a MAC address is only 12 characters, and you've got to put 32 in here. So what you can do is go ahead and put your MAC address in. Notice that the next button is not selectable. You have to have the full 32 characters. And in the past when I used to do this demo, I said, okay, don't let anybody say anything. I've got to count 20 zeros now. But if you just get to the front of your MAC address and just start putting in zeros, you'll notice that when you have 20 of them in there, the next button automatically turns black and you can select it. So you don't have to worry about counting them. Click Next. And then you can also tell this computer object, whenever this guy needs to go talk to a WDS server, I know it says RIS, Remote Installation Server, it means WDS. I'm sure they're going to fix that at some point. Anytime this guy needs to go get an image, I want him to go to a specific WDS server. Maybe you have a branch office WDS server you'd prefer that he goes to instead of hopping over a unreliable WAN link and going to a corporate office. So you can tell it which WDS server you want him to go to, or allow him to just choose any that he can talk to. That's pre-staging a client computer. But what actually happens? I'm going to go into WDS. I'm going to go to the Properties, Pixie Response, and what I've got is respond to all client computers, known and unknown. You guys saw me Pixie boot just a minute ago. Should be sitting at, yeah, we're sitting at the beginning of the deployment. I'm going to shut that down. Come back over to my WDS server, and I'm going to tell it to respond to all client computers, known and unknown, but for unknown machines that are not pre-staged in Active Directory, the guy sitting on the wireless in the parking lot who's trying to hack in and grab one of my WDS images, I want to have to provide administrator approval. So I'm going to turn that on, tell it OK. Go back to this Pixie client. I'm going to boot him up. Pardon? I didn't hear the first part, I'm sorry. Can you do bandwidth throttling that says if you're going over a wireless, it's a lot slower? Not with WDS by itself, but you might be able to do something with QoS. You introduce a couple other utilities with it. Look what's happening on my client now. This is the same client that I just booted with a few seconds ago. This is my Pixie client who has not been pre-staged in Active Directory. So what's happening is he's contacting the server. I know it's a pending request ID of 3. If you'd like to, you could put a message from administrator in here. The way you do that is you would use the WDS util command line utility to set the server message. What I have to do now as the administrator, let's say someone tried to do this. This is actually Susie, the secretary, waiting for her machine to Pixie boot. And she calls up the help desk and says, I'm having a problem. I'm sitting at this screen. I can go into my pending devices. I'm in the WDS snap in here. I can look at that pending device number 3 and say, okay, I know that's Susie. I know she's allowed to do it. So I'm going to right click and I can either approve it. I can name and approve it. If I name it, I'm naming the computer object inside Active Directory and approving. If I reject it, That'll reboot her machine. Or did I go to the right one? I don't think so. And there's the one that we approved. And then boot into whichever WinPE I want. Okay. So we've talked about installing WDS, configuring it. Now you've got to add your boot images. These are pretty quick, and I've already talked to you about adding the boot.wim off of your DVDs. The Windows 7 or Server 2008 R2 is the boot.wim you want to use. Always use the latest and greatest boot.wim. If you accidentally use an older one, it'll fail during deployment in the offline servicing pass. So if you ever see that and you're like, wait, which boot.wim am I using an old Vista boot.wim? Then you're going to have problems with it. Always use the latest and greatest. Adding operating system images. These take a little bit longer because they're bigger than WinPEs are. It's the full operating system. So on this, if I want to add a WIM, I can just right-click, Install Images, which I'll show you in just a second, and tell it to add an install image. It'll say, okay, which image group do you want to put it in? Image group? Oh, image groups do single instancing. So you'd want to put all your 32-bit, let's say Windows 7, operating system images in one image group. Then take all your Server 2008 R2, put those in another image group. And you can put as many images as you choose into an image group. Single instancing will wake up, look at every file you're dropping in there, and make sure he doesn't store redundant files. So he'll just put a pointer to files that he already has, just like he did inside those WIM files. Adding a VHD image, not quite so pretty. You're going to use WDS util. It's a command line utility. So on the WDS server, go out to an elevated command prompt, type in this big, lovely line, WDS util, add image. The image file is the path and name of the image file. The server you're adding it to is my WDS server. The type, image type, it's an install image. It can either be an install or a boot. This is an install. The image group I'd like to add it to is Windows 7, and you have to create that image group inside WDS before you can do this. The file name I want to add is windows7.vhd. And then go to lunch. It's going to take a while. The first time I did this, it blue screened my WDS server. Hasn't done that since. But that was like an hour and 10 minutes before I was doing my first presentation at TechEd US. Just completely messed with my mind. Take you back over to the WDS server. To add a boot image, you simply right-click, tell it, add boot image, and then point to wherever that boot.wim is. This one usually takes between like 2 and 5 minutes. It's pretty quick. If you want to add an install image, a WIM image, right-click Install Images and tell it to add an install image. It says, okay, which group do you want to put it in? I'm going to choose the default first group that it creates, image group 1, and then just browse to wherever that install.wim is. And like I said, this one can take a little bit longer to add. How are we doing on time? I have 4 minutes. All right, you can automate WDS. It's not as easy as automating MDT. You're going to need 2 Windows System image scripts. The first script is going to carve out your partitions, format your drives, assign drive letters, get everything ready for what we call the WinPE phase. Those are the first sets of bullets there. And then you're going to need a second script that takes care of the UBI phase, the out-of-box experience phase. That's that very last reboot you come up and you have to tell it what the computer name is, what your time zone is going to be. So you're going to have 2 different scripts. And then you have to put them in 2 different places. On your WDS server, that WinPE script that carves out partitions for you, You have to put that in your remote install folder, WDS client unattend. The second script, within the WDS snap-in, you'll right-click the server properties, go to the properties client tab and tell it to enable. In fact, let me show you this just real quick. I don't have that much left. The first script is under, okay, I thought it didn't take long. No, I looked right at it. Enable unattended installations. And you can choose one script for a 32-bit architecture, another for 64-bit, so you can pick and choose which scripts you want to run. That's your WinPE phase. When the WinPE phase is finished, then it'll go look at the actual installation images. If I right-click on one of these and go to the properties of the actual installation image, I can tell it to allow the image to install in unattended mode and then select the unattended second script. So that's how you're going to input two different scripts for WDS to be automated. Get back to the slide deck real quick. There's two last topics. WDS has a new protocol that's been created. It's their multicasting protocol. Think about the image I told you that has 75,000 packets that have to be deployed. We have 5 clients. For a unicast environment, that server would have to create packet 1, send it to client 1, create packet 1, send it to client 2, create packet 1, send it to client 3. I think you see where I'm going. In a broadcast environment, what would happen is server 1 would create packet 1 and just send it out to everybody. Well, we want something in the middle. What you actually want is for server 1 or the WDS server to get packet 1 and send it out to that group of machines. That's the multicasting function that we have here. But it's even cooler than that. In Server 2008, some issues we ran into was all the clients would multicast, and the slowest client that was getting the image would dictate the speed to everybody else. Well, that's not fair. So with Server 2008 R2's WDS, we now have 3 streams of traffic: fast, medium, and slow. So your clients come in, they all start as fast. This is a threshold that you can set in the registries. So you set what's fast, medium, and slow. Everybody starts out at fast. As clients join the transmission, they can dumb themselves down to medium or slow. But in that one stream, the slowest client will still dictate the speed to everybody else in that one stream. But if one client's really, really, really slow, he gets to go to the slow stream, and the other guys can still do fast or medium. Something else that's cool about this multicast is I've got 5 clients that are getting this image. Let's say I go over, they're halfway done, and I go over and I start the 6th client and the 7th client and the 8th client. The first packet they might get of that image could be packet number 10,000. What happens is WDS just keeps sending the packets out. When it's done, it shouts out and says, hey, does anybody need me to start again? Those last clients that joined at packet 10,000, they're going to say, yeah, I need you to start again. So the WDS server will start again for them and hand out the packets they need. And then when everybody's done, the transmission's completed. Creating multicast transmissions is done by right-clicking the actual OS image and just say multicast transmission. 2 kinds. Autocast is what I just described to you. Scheduled cast is different. Scheduled cast is if you're trying to set up a classroom or a lab environment and you want everybody to install that image at noon today. Or you want when 25 machines connect to the WDS server, now the WDS server can send out the image to those 25 machines. It doesn't do that round robin thing. If any client connects in the middle, he's not going to get the image. Last topic, MDT and WDS together. The nice thing is that MDT, WinPE, that's automatically generated for you on the deployment server can be stored on your WDS server. Then you can go out to your target machines. You can Pixie boot F12 them. They connect to the WDS server. You choose the MDT WinPE, and that thing's smart enough to know who the MDT server is, where the deployment share is, and which image, if you've automated it, you'd like to deploy to these clients. The second thing you get is you can get multicasting for your MDT images by using WDS. So really, you get the most robust deployment by combining the two. I'm not going to go over this slide, but I like having it out there. You guys should have access to this slide deck. I like to give you the pros and the cons on each one of the products so you can choose which one you want to start with. So that's what this is about. And what we covered were MDT, WDS, getting Server 2008 out there, and talked about the differences between the two products. That's left over from Australia. And guys, thanks a lot for hanging out with me. I think I went 2 minutes over, so I really appreciate you staying. And enjoy your drinks tonight. Thank you, guys.